Hello, I'm Bruce Zimmerman, and this is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week. Now, we're going to do a quick review of the garden plants that I have received from President's Choice over the years. And the reason I'm doing it this way is that, yes, I've told you about the plants in the past, but these plants are now, 3 years old, 2 years old. In other words, they've survived, done well in the garden, and therefore they are well worth consideration. So I want this sort of as a review of, not just because this is new or we planted that 2 weeks ago and it's doing wonderful. This one is where it stands up in your home garden year after year. The first one I'm going to start with is from 2014 spring. It is the Morton Golden Glow Elderberry. Now, with this Golden Glow Elderberry, it came in a 2-gallon pot. It has continued to survive, and it gives me that sort of cut leaf golden green look that is really quite nice. It makes a spectacular large plant that is, of course, a nice contrast to all the other plants that are mainly leafy green. They may be different textures, they may be different in the actual tone of the green, but it can also be on whether it's a coarse or finer type of leaf, so that your structure is a little different, and the way the leaves are held, etc. So they make a good backdrop. The problem I had with this particular plant was the borer. Now, there is a borer that goes after elderberry. It did go after this one. I have continued to lose branches here and there to the borer, which means I have to go in and cut them out. And they seem to still produce new shoots from either the old stems that survive or from the ground, so that I've actually got a decent plant even now in my garden. It's got a strange looking base, mind you, because a lot of the stems have died down to the ground, but others have come back up. And of course, from the ones that are still remaining, some side branches which are fantastically thick, right? So we are looking at a plant that's a good 6 feet tall. And given that still effort that I am talking about even now. So, in other words, it stands up even when it gets the borer. Now, that's unusual. Most of the elders or elderberry plants do not. Okay? Now, the next one from the same year was the Snow Day Surprise Pearl Bush. Now, Pearl Bush, I know, has also been known as white forsythia because it comes out with white flowers, and a lot of them, on the second year wood before the leaves. And you got to remember that this does not actually come out into flower until May. So, even though you may get your forsythia a little earlier, this one is actually going to be a little later. And it is pure white. And the very fact that it's called Snow Day is a good indication that it is prolific in its flowers, large in its flowers compared to some of the other varieties of pearl bush. And in my opinion, this one does extremely well because it's done well in my garden. I haven't given it extraordinary care, and it's giving me more and more color, probably within the next couple of years, it's going to reach its mature height. It's more and more and more is doing better in my mixed border garden. So we're looking at a plant that will eventually reach 3 to 4 feet. That's the other thing. It's going to be as wide as it is tall, but it also is going to give you the flowers, but then you have a different color green leaf to a lot of others in and around it. So again, a contrast. I like Snow Day Surprise Pearl Bush. I would highly recommend it to anybody simply because once it's established, it just keeps going and keeps doing wonderful things. Now, the Elijah Blue Festuca grass. Again, doing well in my garden. Now, the only one that didn't do well was because the granite stone bird fell on it several times over the last few years. So basically, my freestone structure of granite, and it was usually the head that fell on it, and the head weighs at least 80 pounds. So even though it was being bombarded by this 80-pound granite rock, it still survived. It came up and has continued to grow, as has others in the garden, both front and back. So yes, that means they're reliable. The other one was the panicum, which is called North Wind. It's a switchgrass. Again, it's one of those ones that I was a little worried about this past year with all the rain and the wet and the standing water in that area where it was. But it did come back, and it did do very well. It didn't like the standing water. It took a little longer to, let's say, start its growth. But you know what? Still did. Still looks fabulous. It's 4 or 5 feet tall already. Certainly not in flower yet, but it will be coming. So Prairie Wind is coming along very, very well. The drinking gourd hosta has survived a lot of abuse in my garden. This is the one that has that very heavily corrugated cup with a blue tinge to the leaves. And it's called drinking gourd because it looks like you could drink water out of it, and you probably could. Again, this one took a lot of neglect and abuse in my garden and is still alive and doing quite well. I did move it this spring simply because it was being lost amongst the other plants in that part of the garden. So it got picked up and moved, and it's been put into a new area and doing quite well. The other one that has been doing very well in my garden is the Echinacea Cleopatra. Now, Cleopatra is fragrant. It's yellow. It fades to a white, but it is everything that you'd want in an Echinacea. Nice color, good big center knob, okay, and the height is reasonable. Doesn't seem to be getting more than about 18 inches tall. I like that. I think it's rated to be 16 inches tall. I think mine's about 18. So it's doing well. And it has continued to multiply and produce more and more side shoots and a lot more flowers. My congratulations to the breeder on this one. This one is well worth putting into your garden. Not only would people like it because it's a different color than their usual, but it is also fragrant. And I did catch the bees having a good time with the pollen on there. The hardy figs are another one from 2014. They produce very delicious figs. But the problem with these ones is they may die back to the ground and come back up, or they get nibbled on by rabbits. So you have to do some protection against rabbits. Now you can grow them in pots, which is what I've done. and you sink the pot in the garden, and then you put the wraps around the actual stems. Some of the stems will die back even though you've put the, let's say, plastic sleeves on there to keep the rabbits away. But again, done very well. This past year, I put them into my garage, left them there, watered them occasionally, and they did even better. And they are loaded with figs this year. So that might be the secret. I'll try again next year, and we'll see. But this is a hardy fig, and if I so decide to plant it in the garden, quite likely I'll have to do the protection against rabbits, but I think we'll see that it'll do very well long term in the soil. If it survives all this in the pots year after year from 2014, well, that more or less is a good indication of the quality of the plant as well. Okay, now let's move on to some of the plants from the 2015 year. They have a bunch of them, and many of them were perennials that I picked up, because you do have a choice with PC and which ones you want to grow. And I will say this about that. The Cool as a Cucumber hosta is doing well. It did have to be moved this spring because it was being crowded out for both light, water, and competition by hydrangeas and perennial sunflowers, and they were just being pushed right out. So it's been moved. It was moved late, and it's still doing quite well. I did put mulch over top, and I have given a little bit of plant food, and I did improve the soil. But we'll see what happens with that one. Now, the hosta that's never looked back from 2015 was Island Breeze. Now, this one has a great bright variegation. Let's just say it's got wide green margins and yellow centers, and it's just loving it. It's in almost full sun, and what I would say is if you can give it half day full sun, this plant will just do wonders. I do keep it moist, and but boy, is it doing really well. It's about 18 inches across. It's about 12 inches tall right now, and that is a plant that it just keeps on giving. The other one was Heuchera. Now, Grape Expectations, that's Grape Expectations, is doing extremely well. This is a grapey purple Heuchera, and let's be honest, it's great colored leaves, great contrast, nice shape, and even though the water was standing in that area this spring, they still came back and came back well. So that is a good indication of a good, tough plant. That's Heuchera, and it is Grape Expectations. Now, the Hemerocalli Daylily Holiday Song did extremely well in my garden. It has taken a little while. It was a little slow the first year, but it has since done very well. And even though it was in a very wet area this spring, with all the rain, that's not unusual, but it is doing very well, and it's just going to be coming into bloom shortly. It has just a huge number of flowers coming just, I would say any time now. It is a coral orange with a scarlet eye, and it's got an orange throat. So it is an excellent daylily for you to go and look for. The next one from 2015 that has done well is the Endless Summer Hydrangea Bloomstruck. And this one is fantastic in the fact that it is, how can I say this? It's got more blooms, sized up nicely, easy to look after. Right now it's about, I would say it's a good 2 feet tall and 2 feet wide. It's going to eventually be about 3 to 4 foot in all directions. And I think what you're going to find is that this one is really going to do well in a garden. It's given me pink flowers. It's easy to look after. You give it some water, it does well. You give it occasional food, but I mean really occasional, and it's doing extremely well. The Never Alone Rose, which is a very disease-resistant rose, and it is very disease-resistant. I've planted it such that it is crowded, so the air movement is low, the light levels are high, and I'm still getting good foliage without black spot and mildew. This Never Alone Rose is definitely a rose bush that you want to put into your garden, and I can strongly recommend it. It is the brainchild of the Canadian Football League Alumni Association and the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association, and a part of every rose bush you purchase of this, it goes to the Never Alone Foundation, in support of cancer patients and their families. So definitely all good reasons to buy a Never Alone rose. I'm Bruce Zimmerman. This is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week.